So we're moving into the first panel, and let me just describe to you how this will unfold. It's going to focus on the big picture, based on the OECD FAO agricultural outlook from this year. We have a video presentation from the chief economist of the FAO, Maximo Torero, that we'll start with. Then I'll invite my former colleague, Marcel Adenauer, up to present from the OECD's perspective, the big picture that was in that report. Then we'll have a panel discussion just following, and time for Q&A at the end, wrapping up the first panel at 10:45. So that's the overarching plan. And I'm going to ask now for the technicians if they can move on to the video that we have from the FAO.
Dear friends, excellencies, and colleagues, my name is Maximo Torero. I'm the Chief Economist of FAO. It's a privilege to join you once again at this distinguished forum of global experts. Our shared mission to guide agri-food systems toward long-term sustainability has never been more critical. Your work sits at the heart of today's policy agenda. We are confronting convergent challenges: persisting food insecurity, still 673 million people in chronic undernourishment, environmental degradation, extreme and frequency of intensity of climate events increasing and volatility, deepening inequalities. All this under a context that 7 of the 9 planetary boundaries have already been violated. So advancing evidence-based solutions is more important than ever, is essential. Agri-food systems are dynamic and interconnected, influenced by income growth, dietary transitions, technology adoption, resource constraints, geopolitics, and the increased intensity and frequency of climate events. It is precisely because of this complexity that over the 2 decades ago, FAO and OECD replaced FAO's former World Food Model with Agricultural Outlook, a forward-looking analytical tool built to monitor structural drivers and quantify future risks and opportunities. This is extremely important today because of the level of risks and uncertainties, as I mentioned before. Not only that, the key cereals exporting countries have reconcentrated again to the levels that we faced in 2007, 2008, more partially close to that. And that's why our exposure to risk is higher. Any climate event that affects any of the key exporting countries, which have been reduced because of the war in Ukraine, will have a significant impact over prices and price volatility. Our collaboration brings together FAO's global commodity expertise and data systems with OECD's strength in economic modeling and policy analysis. FAO has also revamped its capacity of modeling, and we have built up new models, global models, that will help us to reduce this uncertainty and to bring more evidence into the discussions. The result is a robust, transparent, and a policy-relevant evidence base to support governments and international partners. This year's FAO OECD Agricultural Outlook focuses on the decisive decade ahead. It provides insight essential to guide action towards SDG 2 and the broader 2030 agenda, including on productivity growth, dietary patterns, trade flows, fertilizer markets, and the mitigation of agricultural greenhouse gas emissions. Rising incomes will increase demand for animal-sourced foods, particularly in emerging economies. Yet in many low-income countries, structural constraints from weak market integration to recurring shocks will keep millions undernourished. Closing this nutrition divide is both a moral imperative and a strategic priority for global stability. The outlook projects that global agriculture and fisheries output will grow by around 14% over the next decade, driven predominantly by improvements in total factor productivity. We need to produce more with less. Without mitigation, however, agri-food systems emissions could still increase by about 6%, further straining planetary boundaries. Growth must become more resource efficient and climate compatible, and that's the big tasks that we have ahead of us. Scenario modeling shows that when we can achieve both goals despite all these challenges, that means eradicating hunger and reduce emissions. We have done the roadmap to SDG 2 and the 1.5 degrees, and that's essentially what we are trying to do and the agenda that we have in place to be able to achieve both goals. But in terms of the scenario, we show that raising productivity by at least 15% through innovation and sustainable intensification, accelerating adoption of low emissions practices and technologies, strengthen risk management instruments and climate resilience, and mobilizing the necessary investments and policies at the scale. This transition will require coordination across ministries, markets, and borders. Trade remains indispensable. By 2034, 22% of the calories we consume will be sourced from international markets. A predictable, rules-based multilateral trading system is crucial to reduce volatility, improve access to nutritious food, and leverage regional comparative advantage for global food security. And that's, as you all know, this is a big challenge in these days, and that's where we need to bring more solid evidence to show the importance of the trade flows. Above all, we must continue investing in farmers and rural communities with digital tools, access to finance, insurance, advisory services, and fair market opportunities. Farmers are the primary managers of land, water, and biodiversity, supporting them to unlock global sustainability gains. We just launched 2 days ago the SOFA of this year, which is on land degradation, and it clearly shows what are the actions that are needed to minimize this problem. Remember, the crucial issue here is the intertemporality. What we do today and it is impacts tomorrow. We cannot free write the present for the future. And here is where this type of solid investments, producing more with less, recovering or reinvesting in land to avoid degradation and keeping the health of our soils will be essential for the future. The same in the case of trade. We have to accelerate the process of access to trade and improve trade so that we can get all the food that is needed in place and distributed across countries to be able to achieve SDG 2. The window for action is narrow, but the opportunities are unprecedented. Working together, we can transform the agri-food systems to nourish a growing population, restore ecosystems, and build resilience to future shocks, leaving no one behind. Colleague, let me finalize by bringing up a very important book that I always use and which I think is central in the case of the agri-food systems, the book of Risk Under Uncertainty of Rubenfield. I think it's essential that we understand that the agri-food systems operate under risk and uncertainties. And to be able to work under risk and uncertainties, we need these modeling tools. We need this scenario building. It's the only way we can create the scenarios and we can understand what will happen as a consequence of our actions in the different scenarios. So let's bring the technology that we have. Let's bring the techniques that we have to be able to achieve this goal. So thank you so much. And it was a real pleasure to be with you, although just virtually. Thank you.
Great. So one of the things I really appreciate about Maximo's intervention is the idea that we really need to focus on innovation, and these market outlook tools that we're using are trying to crystallize insights about how innovation can actually help us ensure that the food and ag sector is able in the future to continue to meet these global goals around food security and also to deal with these big environmental issues. And of course, one of the challenges that I guess we'll be talking about today has to do with how do trade and markets in the current settings influence, either in a positive or a negative way, investments in innovation and sustainable productivity. So now what I'd like to do is invite Marcel Adenauer to the stage to present the OECD big picture, which will, I think, dig into a bit more of the details of what the modeling showed this year. And after that, I'll invite Tassos and Bence up to the stage for the panel discussion. Over to you.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Leanne. And yeah, I'm working in this Outlook production process since 11 years as a core member of the team. And yeah, I've done about 15 of these editions in my career so far. And what we're doing every year is, since 2005, together with the FAO, we're producing this 10-year projections for agriculture and fish markets. Which is based on lots of expert inputs, which is balanced with our PE model, AgLink Cosimo. And oh, sorry, didn't want to do that. Yeah, and helps us to understand how markets might change over the medium term under current policies in place. And yeah, the content of the organization of the publication has changed, as you can see here. We've added commodities, and but more recently we mainly focused on reshaping the what was formerly called the overview chapter. Today it's called the trends and prospects, to provide messages around the triple challenge that food systems are facing today. And this outlook is built through a month of work where we collect data, run models, or review the results. And experts from many countries are taking part in this process. And at the end, we have a strict review as well, with Maximo, who has to sign off at the end, as well as our working party for agriculture policies and markets. So we hope at the end to produce a clear reliable and useful report for everyone. So usually we start in December with collecting all available data up to the end of a year, which was 2024 for this edition. But then we have to make assumptions on what we take exogenous in our projections. And one example is the macroeconomic environment, and I will come back to assumptions at the end of the presentation again. But here you can see already something on population and GDP growth that we assume. So we are generally expecting a slower pace of population growth, reaching 8.8 billion people by 2034, and with an average annual growth rate of 0.8%, that's slower than the 1% we experienced in the past decade. But that varies a lot by region, and that will shape the regional patterns of the future demand as well. But you can see that the black diamonds are always above the red diamonds, so population slows down everywhere. So let's start with some of our consumption projections. And we see that since the global economic growth is going to stay stable, we can say that, first keep in mind that the projections are subject to considerable uncertainties, especially in the short term, and key areas of causing uncertainty include, of course, the geopolitical and trade tensions, regulatory cooperations, global sustainability efforts. And it's not so easy to capture those or to make assumptions on how they will evolve. So here for global demand of agriculture and fish products, which are set to grow by about 13% over the next 10 years. We see that food remain the primary use of agriculture commodities, which is on world average 42%, but it's much more in low-income countries, as you can see from the high blue bar in the lower income countries on the graph. And most of this growth of demand will come from middle and low income countries. Population in these regions get richer and more urbanized, and as a result, they are eating more animal products. This also boosts the demand for feed crops in turn. And we therefore project the an increase in the share of staple crops that go to feed. And we also report food loss and waste, which you can see at the top of these bars. But we do not assume large changes of waste shares over the next decade here. And this graph here looks at food use in calorie intake measures, and especially in lower, middle, and upper middle income countries. We see that the calorie intakes are rising while they stay more flat in the higher income segments. And as I said already before, diets in the lower segments are shifting a bit more to the animal products. But for the high income countries, we don't see a lot of movements, for example, towards plant-based meat alternatives or protein alternatives. And recent dips in the meat consumption has been mostly due to change in prices rather than these changing preferences. But on the longer term, of course, we might see bigger shifts as younger generations make different food choices. Here in this graph, we zoom a bit closer into the animal products. You see this horizontal line that gives the recommendation of animal product consumption at 300 kilocalories per person per day. And you see that the high-income countries are way above this recommendation, but also you see that the low-income countries are way below, and we don't see them catching up over the next 10 years. They will still be heavily based on staples, with about 70% of food intake coming from cereals, pulses, and similar crops. Let's move now to the production side of the projections. And on our outlook, production grows logically with the same percentage change as consumption because we balance globally. Livestock is growing faster than crops, 16% worth of 14%, and fish is lagging a bit behind with 12%. And we see that 83% of the crop growth will be coming from better yields. And that will be led by middle-income countries, especially Asia, Africa, and Latin American countries. India and China lead the Pacific region, which will account for half of the global growth, which is quite a share. Oh, they said we have. I should look from time to time. And in contrast, here in North America and Europe, we'll see slower growth due to resource limits and stricter regulations, and livestock and aquaculture will benefit from rising incomes, especially in Asia and African regions. But not all of this production will come from improved productivity. As a result, direct greenhouse gas emissions are expected to rise by 6%, which of course mainly comes from ruminant and livestock production, which make up about 70% of that increase. The biggest emissions increase are likely in South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa, where the herds are expanding relatively more and productivity is still low. And in some cases, the output per animal is only 1/10 of what it is in more efficient systems. But the good news in these projections is that the carbon intensity is going down, which means the emissions per unit of output. This is declining globally, but also in all, if you zoom in all countries. And South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa could see the biggest improvements here because they have more room to catch up and reduce emissions through the better practices. In recent outlooks, we have started to do stylized scenarios to get a bit the uncertainty around these projections and to explore how trends could shift if major changes like new technologies or policies would take place. And in 2022, we've showed a pathway to end global hunger by 2030 while keeping agriculture emissions in line with the 1.5 to 2 degree climate target. And in 2024, we explored the impact of halving food loss and waste. Now this year, we focus on scaling up emission reduction technologies in agriculture. That means tools and practices that reduce emissions without cutting production and productivity. And the global goal remains the same as we had in 2022, so it's the zero hunger goal by increasing the calorie intake in undernourished regions, where the prevalence of undernourishment is projected to be above 2.5%. And that's only happening here in the lower middle income and the low income regions. And for that, you can see we have to increase the total calorie intake. And at the same time, we assume that there's also a bit more shift towards the animal products in these regions. And it means in turn that we have 10% rise in low middle income countries and 35% in low income countries, while food intake in the other food secure regions, we don't touch that. And the result of this analysis, where we also put in like a carbon price of about $100 per ton, which induces these emission reduction technologies. And by this, we see that the productivity gains needed to meet the zero hunger goal dropped from 28% that we published in 2022 to 15%. And Maximo was referring to that before as well. And we also cut the emissions. We see that emissions go down by 7% compared to the 6% increase we had before. And in this graph, you see the shaded bubbles show the production versus the emission growth in the baseline, and the solid ones the same in the scenario. And the size of the bubble is always the value in 2034. And you see that the impact varies by region here. And in low-income countries like Sub-Saharan Africa, Near East, North Africa, there are a bit of a exception from the rule. The increase in production dominates. And this is particularly evident here in Africa, where GHG emissions continue to rise under the scenario compared to the baseline. And the main reason for that is that for meeting the zero hunger target, these regions require significant increases in production levels. In more food secure regions like Europe, North America, East Asia, productivity improvements dominate and leading to an absolute reduction in the emissions here. Then I have one slide on trade, which shows that agri-food trade has stayed resilient despite the COVID conflicts and trade disruptions, but the share of global production traded has stabilized around 22-23% and expected to remain there as well. Exporters grow their surpluses, like Latin America, expected to remain the world's leading exporting region due to key countries, Brazil, Argentina, and Paraguay. Then we have North America at the second place, with agriculture net exports rebounding after falling from their peak in 2022, but stabilizing on a bit lower level. Europe and Central Asia became a net exporter in 2014 following agriculture restructuring and development and investments in the Black Sea regions. And on the other hand, the net importers that you see on the right are rising their deficits, showing how important imports are to meet their food security goals. For example, sub-Saharan Africa net imports of basic food commodities are projected to increase by 55% by 2034, showing this that it's crucial for supporting food security of the growing population. Coming to prices, and that's a bit contradicting what Tassos was challenging. Our prices continue a real global decrease over the long term. And this is based on two key assumptions: steady gains in productivity, which help reduce production costs through investments in technology, for example, or like biotechnology, mechanization, or precision farming. And at the same time, the productivity growth is outpacing the demand growth but that's an assumption that we make at the very beginning. But the impact of lower global prices isn't the same everywhere. Local outcomes depend, of course, on transportation costs, on exchange rates, trade policies, and how well local markets are integrated in global ones. So coming back now to some of the assumptions that we make. These are the main categories we always have to think about. It's like policy, it's population, GDP, it's inflation, exchange rates, then the oil price as a kind of energy proxy in agriculture. And we also think about world market prices first. Let's quickly go through those. We have the policies, and there, in the absence of more specific information, we assume that everything which is agreed today stays in place. So no anticipation of what could happen based on what's currently discussed. For population, we take the last revision of the United States Population Prospects database, which was 2024, and there we pick the medium variant. But there are also others which could be picked as well. Then on GDP, inflation and the exchange rates, there we have a kind of mingle of databases. At the OECD side, we use first the OECD Economic Outlook, which gives us 2 years, and extend that then based with the method which is done at the FAO. They base their macros on the IMF Economic Outlook and have the Oxford Economic Model to run the macro environment into the future. And based on this, all the macros are extended. Finally, the oil price. There we have a simple rule where we start with a short-term update of the OECD Economic Outlook. Then we take the spot price of the December assume that for the first year of projection, which is 2025 in this edition. And from there, we assume flat real development in the oil price. But yeah, the oil price discussion has been very intense for years until we came up with the simple rule, because you seldomly get it right, and there is no good model for oil price developments available. And then finally, about world market prices, which could be a bit surprising, because at the end there should be the outcome of supply and demand. But in our process, we have to decide first about the world prices. So we have a few models running at the two institutions. For example, we can plug our new macro environment in our last year's baseline model and see how prices would develop there. Then we have also some time series forecasting models for the sugar commodities, and we extensively look at the ratios between prices, because under a baseline setting where you don't assume ups and downs, you would assume that the ratios between the prices are in a certain historical range. And then we have draft prices that we discuss between the teams at OECD and FAO, and then we have a dedicated meeting to decide upon those prices. The final prices slightly deviate from those assumptions, because at the end we have an endogenous model solving the world, so there is some movement, but the influence of those assumptions is very big. And how big it is, for example, the oil prices assumption, I did a quick run with our model where you see an oil price shock of about 50%, that's the gray dotted line versus the gray solid line, induces for the wheat price an increase of about, I don't remember, we're talking about $300 per ton versus $400 per ton, and that's quite a difference to assume the environment in which agriculture would act. And to have this a bit more complete, we do a partial stochastic analysis with the model where we run 500 times with different assumptions on the macros, different assumptions on yield fluctuations, and see how prices come out from those runs. And here you see the ranges, and you get an idea of how wide the price uncertainty in this outlook is. And you can't see it really good, but the upper price variability is a bit higher, so the upper price risk is a bit higher than the lower price risk compared to our baseline. And I think that's what I wanted to show you for a kickoff, and now I'm happy to look forward for the discussion.
Thanks, Marcel. If you want, you could just take one of the chairs right now. And so as you can see from that presentation, the amount of work that goes into producing these market outlooks is substantial. And one of the things that, as a part of the team that was producing it, that I always found challenging as well, is this idea that it's not a forecast. It's based on the idea that if everything stays the same, what will the world look like? So there's this tension between what we think of as the kind of the fundamentals that are built into the model, like demographics, which are pretty predictable, and then the other parts of it, which we have to communicate around, which have to do with the shocks, the changeability. And here today, probably this question around policy assumptions might be an interesting one to dig into in any case. So now for the next 50 minutes, we'll have a panel discussion. And so first I'd like to invite Bence Toth up to sit next to Marcel, who is the acting head of unit for analysis and outlook at DG Agri. And then Tassos, if you can also join us. Sure, you can come next to me. And so the way this will unfold is that I'll invite each of you to give 4 or 5 minutes reflecting on what you've heard so far. Then we'll have a little bit of a discussion in the panel, and we'll have a little time for questions from the floor. So I'll first hand it over to you. Or does Tassos? Oh, you. Thank you.
Sorry, I was supposed to give you this one. That's mine.
I'll pass this back. Okay, great.
Good.
And it looks like we'll have a little bit of time for a break to grab a coffee and stretch your legs after we finish this panel. So over to you.
Good morning.
Is it on? Super. Thank you so much. So that was the reason why I didn't want to sit next to Tassos, because he's moving his hands around all the time. And I think last time Hungary beat Greece in water polo, so better keep that distance. No, just for you to know, there's history behind. So I joined DG Agri, the Analysis and Outlook unit, back in 2003. So I was actually there when the OECD and FAO merged the AgLink COSIMO model. So it was a very interesting exercise. Also, there was a big review of the models that I was sort of looking at from the side of DG Agri, because we were big users of AgLink since a long time. And yeah, Tassos was my director for a long time, and with Marcel we worked together on the Outlook. So mind the puns and occasional, low punches to the colleagues next to me. Liane, you're safe. So thank you very much for the invitation. It's a great pleasure for me to be here, first time. And I was listening with great interest to the presentations, and I did make a number of notes, and I would focus on around two issues, basically. The one is the approach with respect to ensuring food security or contributing to the achievement of food security. What I noted down is the main focus seemed to be on sustainable productivity, which is a very important element. But I would also highlight that we should also consider sustainable consumption. So consumption is also a very important element of food security. I really appreciated the slide of Marcel, where he showed that basically waste is still a very important element in where the food goes. So I think there's a lot of room for improvement there. And with respect to sustainable consumption, it's not just basically what people consume, but it's also the accessibility and the distribution of food. So we all know that, at least this is in our assessment, that there's plenty of food to go around in terms of production, but a lot of it goes to waste, and a lot of it does not go to those in need, mainly in less developed countries. But also we see that there are issues with respect to affordability in developed countries such as the European Union. So we've seen that over the past couple of years, due to the high inflation of food, which was exceptionally high in a number of countries, one of which where I come from Hungary, that there has been an increase in the population who are food secure vulnerable. So this is a very important issue, I think, that we need to consider. And of course, there it might be a bit difficult to have a clear policy sort of approach. Freedom of consumption is very important. So, but we need to find the right way to address this. The other element which I marked down was the role of science, and there what I marked down is indeed what is the role of science in the Insta world, by which I mean that research and good analysis takes time. On the other hand, we see that in the Twitter sphere or X sphere, whatever it's called now, the political policy messaging and also decisions are instantaneous. So how do we match the need for robust, sound analysis, which is a bit more time-consuming, to the political drive to have quick responses to emerging challenges? And here maybe just a thought that occurred to me, where you were referring to the past discussions on global debate on food. I wasn't there at the time. I'm too young for that. Sorry, Tassos. But is it also, I mean, the change of this new world order, where you have, more players in the field, also more big countries who have an impact, and not just in terms of the markets, but also politically, that it's also making this global debate on food a bit more complicated, and especially now with the new evolution of I don't want to point fingers, but you all know who the elephant is in the room. So whether this leads to, is it just a volatility in the trend of the evolution of global food markets and policies, or are we basically at a breaking point in the trends? As we in statistics like to call it a break in the series, and now we're starting from a new world disorder or order to be seen where we go. And then linked to this, to the role of science, what I also wanted to maybe have a question to Marcel is, for the OECD FAO outlook, in the current setting, and maybe looking at the past, do you see an evolution of the influence of your report for decision makers? Has there been any change? And also, do you see any challenges that you face in trying to find the right audience and to pick this up? So this is, just to put you on the spot. Otherwise, I'm also here to answer any questions you might have. Just be gentle with me, and that's it. Thank you.
So thank you for taking over the moderator's role of asking questions. And Tassos, I'll ask you to go next. And then, Marcel, you have a little bit of time to think about how you want to respond.
Yeah, it's working. Okay. Some points on the basis of what we heard from Marcel, that I think we need to focus a little bit deeper in the analysis. But before I do that, in your last graph about the scenarios, which is one of the contributions that we made, Humberto's that works with you was with us at the time when we started doing it with the GRC. I think this is a graph that is extremely important for those of us that are dealing with that type of issues. It's very tricky when one uses it in policymakers, because instead of actually appreciating the depth of the background that goes in producing these outcomes, they just point out, there is a lot of uncertainty, as if we don't know that there is a lot of uncertainty, and they have the tendency to diminish what we're doing. Now, there are a couple of things that are not coming out clear from the manner by which the baseline outlook is coming out, and partly it's because they're policy linked. The first thing that we haven't really focused much is what is happening with the reversal of the ag trade position of the US. In the last 3 years, the US have turned into a net importer of agricultural products. When I was based at the Commission delegation in Washington, 1996 to 2000, the US had a huge surplus with the EU and with the rest of the world. And this reversal has a lot to do with the fact that still 40% of what the US exports in value is bulk commodities. And it's basically corn and soybeans. Unlike what has happened with the reversal of the US, which is value-added products. And this is also pretty much linked with the trade assumptions and trade policy assumptions. Second, on the price trend, what you mentioned, if it contradicts what I said or not, a lot of it has to do with your projections, because for the first part of this century, what I have mentioned applies. That is, there is a reversal for this trend. And my question mark is, will this continue? So to a large extent, we still need to find out the answer to that, because what you showed is an outcome of the exercise. And part of this outcome is linked to what you mentioned. You assumed a price of 100 euros per ton for carbon. And not only you, I mean, this is something that is round and is thrown out in the public policy debate. Despite what some people think, I'm not a soil scientist. I'm not even a typical ag economist on the standard of something, because I'm an economist that did graduate studies in agricultural economics, mainly on the economic parts. But from what I've heard from all these different projects, it strikes me that we use the same price for carbon, where we know that different soil conditions would have a different impact of the capacity of the soil to sink carbon, even if we use the same practice. Yes, wheat is wheat, but we don't have one price for wheat. We have different qualities of wheat, and we know what's the difference. So the question that I have been asking, which in my view has policy implications, is what happens if the price that we use for carbon reflects something that is much more linked to the realities on the ground, literally and metaphorically, but also the realities that are coming out from all these research projects and the new knowledge that is being generated, and we underestimate. And that's not a criticism for you, because you also take this assumption coming from others. Where it's, if you want, a polite criticism is the use of oil price. It's irrelevant. It's a natural gas price that is irrelevant from a policy debate, especially in the shifts that we're making, and also with the fact that prices have stabilized and still Europe pays 4 times a higher natural gas price than the US to produce fertilizer, which is the same process on both sides of the Atlantic. And I mentioned fertilizer. That's the other question. I hope Tiffany will mention something afterwards. Okay, nitrogen fertilizer is nitrogen fertilizer, and it's a non-scientist that also is asking this question. But bulk nitrogen fertilizer is one thing. You just put it in the tractor and you just spread it all over the place. Coated natural gas fertilizer that is linked to precision farming and puts into the soil what is needed in the soil is a completely different thing. How do we take this, which is very difficult, into account when we talk about new type of practices? And I had 5 points, but I had the 6th one because now I'm speaking after Benson. No, it's not only for you, but you mentioned the consumption part, which is very important. You also put waste. Now, and I have asked this question as an economist. FAO put this number out some years back that we have 30% food waste. We all know now that it's wrong. We do. Politicians don't know that's wrong. And this is one of the most serious things that we have to address. We have to address food waste and food losses. But you don't address food waste and food losses if you don't, your starting point is not an accurate figure, okay? And do we measure kilograms? Do we measure value? At which level do we measure? And what type of policy measures are relevant? In my view, this is the reason why whenever we do this exercise every year, we come up with the same type of changes and same type of food waste in the future, because we don't really capture what is happening on the ground. And what happens on the ground is 3 factors at the same time. It's prices, it's income, and it's taste and preferences. And one of the things that we have underestimated, not only as economists, but in the political debate, the policy debate, what have you, is the long-term resilience, resistance, call it whatever you want, of tastes and preferences that are culturally determined, and it's very difficult and hard to change.
Thanks very much, Tassos. Marcel,
Yeah,
there's a few things that came bouncing to you.
I'll try to pick up on the food loss and waste first, because indeed, how you measure it makes a huge difference, right? If you measure it in calories or in value, makes either fruits and vegetables very high share, gives high shares of waste, or the meats, right? So because the content of calories is much different, and it depends on your view of what you want to use, right? If you look at food security, then you probably want to look at the calorie shares. But if you're concerned about the production values, then you look at production values. And last year we did this scenario where we reduced food loss and waste by 50%, and that all looked very nice. So of course, prices. Food becomes more affordable, it has to be produced less, emissions go down as well because of lower production. And it all looks like win-win-win, but we didn't really look at the farmers. And in such scenarios, prices drop quite a bit if you take away like not 30%, but like 15% of the, or I think it was like 12% that we took away of the demand. Then of course, prices would drop, and how could farmers cope with that? And all these elements, we don't really discuss so much. Then on the price graph, indeed, I have a lot of sympathy about thinking that the trend has changed, and I actually pushed this discussion last year when we had the price discussion, but there was still the global or the agreement in the team that we would not deviate from this assumption that production growth is outpacing the demand growth. Then I also want to reiterate what Massimo said about the investment in modeling them, because it's this modeling stuff, although sometimes when you see results, you say, so what? It's still the only way to analyze these uncertainties. And sometimes you can try to start in an Excel sheet with a few data points, but if you want to have all the feedbacks or to approximate at least the feedbacks that exist in reality, then you need these modeling approaches, I think. On your question of the outlook impact, I can't say, but our director really would love to have something to measure it. but we have download rates which have increased over time and are still always on a high level. Then we have the feedback from the members that support our work very much, so we don't have a problem to get this product acknowledged every time. And we started with webinars presenting these main messages a few years back, and they are also picked up very well. So in this regard, I think we're doing good, but I guess there could be more, and I can't say how much in the policymaker really use it is at the end. Yeah, I think that's where the few things for me now.
Great, thank you. Well, you can hear the range of issues that are coming up. And in terms of this panel, which is really meant to focus on these market outlook tools, one of the questions that keeps coming to my mind is how do we prioritize? Okay, so I have two questions, which I'll put to all three of you, and you can pick up my questions, or if there's something you've heard that you'd like to react to, that's fine. So how do we prioritize investments in these models, right? Like this model clearly is a huge investment, and both within the OECD and the FAO, but also in capitals where we know, just building on Marcel's response, we don't see it publicly, but we know that government officials are using our baseline to think about their own scenarios for planning. So we don't have numbers to attach to that, but we do know that it's used based on the OECD communities, the working parties, and the Committee on Agriculture. So one question is, what would you prioritize in terms of investing in making the model kind of fit for purpose? And then the other question I have, and I'm not sure I'm going to be able to phrase it that well. So when I was working previously with Marcel and the team, and we were always talking about the price decision, and it starts at the beginning, and you know that it's a political decision, really, because if you decide to shift the assumption that prices are either flat or slightly declining to increasing, that's quite a big change, which would be the headline, essentially, probably, for that product. So is there a world where there's a way that you could shift that model into a space where you start out with a slightly different price assumption, or is that just quite difficult in the context? So do you have a reaction? Okay, and then we can just go down the line, and I'm happy to hear your thoughts.
Thank you, Leanne. You heard my voice latest, so I take the liberty of starting. No, this is super relevant. So for us in the European Commission, investment in modeling is super important, but equally important is data. Let's not forget that we need good, sound, robust data. Our unit in DG Agri is also the one responsible for running the Farm Sustainability Data Network. So we have a lot of emphasis in making sure that is going well. Now we have the transition from FADN to FSDN, but I won't not get into that. Focusing still on the modeling part, there are a number of, if I remember well, around 5 research projects funded by Horizon Europe, which are still ongoing now, some close to being finalized, some on the way, and some just having been launched. Tassos is part of a few. So we are focusing a lot in trying to get it right, that we have the right tools to be able to do sound prospective analysis. So for the Commission and DG Agri in particular, it's very important that we can do this as part of our better regulation objectives, so with respect to evaluations, so ex-ante assessments, and also the impact assessments for the policy, so scenario analysis. So we are in very close collaboration, of course, with the Joint Research Center and their integrated modeling platform, where they have a number of models, and we constantly strive to develop. And indeed, this is basically one of the big challenges. How do we make sure that we manage to develop these models so that they provide timely output? So just now, coming to the proposal on the future CAP, already learning the lesson from the current CAP, where we have a much bigger focus on member state implementations of their policies, a model like AgLink, which we use also for our own baseline as a basis, super useful, but we don't use it for the analysis of the policy, because now we need to go down at least to member state level and even beyond. So luckily we have the CAPRI model, which does regional assessment, and IFM CAP, which was developed in the JRC, sorry, which looks at farm level. And just a teaser, if I may, for our upcoming medium-term outlook report that will be published in December. So for the first time, we have decided to include analytical results using the IFM CAP model. So I'm really looking forward to the response to that. We will be showing what are some of the implications of the medium-term projections from using the AgLink model at the farm level. It's a bit still experimental, but I think it will bring a lot of value, and we really look forward to that impact. On the price decision, so I'm glad to say that given the fact that we use the OECD FAO outlook as the basis for our own medium-term projections, the political decision on where to set the price falls on the shoulders on the OECD FAO. Thank you.
Thanks very much. And I think this question of kind of global models and local impacts, like navigating where the data and measurement needs are in order to interpret what our global insights are down to the local, and what the local insights are back to the global, is really important. So Marcel, do you have thoughts you'd like to share?
Yes, on the price decision, of course, we could make different assumptions. For example, if we assume that the mitigation technologies will be picked up, that a carbon price will be set for agriculture, then the scenario would show that as well, then we would be on an increasing real price path. And yeah, it's all about assumptions there. Currently, we just assume that there are no efforts, and that supports the lower price story. But yeah, as soon as you start to implement these technologies, which cost money, which of course might be subsidized somehow, but yeah, when they cost money, they will increase cost, and prices go up and might follow the new path. True on the how fit are the global models for local questions. This has always been there, but it's becoming more and more important since especially for you, where the CAP becomes so granular and everyone can decide how to interpret it. But still, yeah, as a benchmark, to have this global consistent starting point, I think we should not get rid of that to feed then into more granular analysis, I would say.
Maybe just to comment on your comment, which is to say, one of the values, I think, of the Outlook baseline from an OECD FAO perspective is that it really is building consensus around what the baseline looks like. So it's this interaction with policymakers that those communities have, which is very useful, I think, in terms of kind of consolidating how people are thinking about what the world might look like. Over to you, Tassos.
Yeah. Let me also speak very freely based on the experience I had starting with something that goes back. When I was in Fissler's cabinet, and Fissler comes one day with a PowerPoint of Stefan Tangerman, who was the director at OECD at the time. But it was not Stefan's idea about how you do away with direct payments with a bond scheme and the rest. It was an OECD paper that had a classification of the trade distorting impact of different payments. Decoupled, 7% distortion, I still remember it. Coupled, 24%, market price support, 92%. And it was based on that, and the experience on the US that was showing that the US going backwards in policy would have allowed us to have an advantage, that we made the proposal we made, no matter what scenarios circulate about what people think what happened in this reform. But here was a commissioner that had in mind the potential impact of a policy measure on what happens on trade. And trade was the big player in the discussion at the moment. Fisher-Bowl also looks very much on that. With Dacian Cholos, it took towards the end of his career in the commission, his term, to come up into something and a focus on markets. It was with the price, volatility, and the food security, but it also came with Hogan was very different because from the beginning he was very much interested in that. So it depends on who you have as a policy maker and what's your audience that you need to be aware of, because you need to get in their mind and find the right issue that will interest them in the result you have. Now, are there people that are seriously interested in what carbon farming does? I don't know. But hopefully when people keep talking about carbon and emissions, somebody should put in their mind, listen, this works, this doesn't work. So that is where models, in my view, should look in terms of limiting the number of assumptions or scenarios to something that is relevant in the current policy debate. And here, allow me, as a Greek, to use a distinction that I found from a Greek word that comes out much better in English, especially American English, than anything else. When we talk about politiki, it's the same word that you use and the same meaning, whether it's in Greek, in Latin-based languages, or German-based languages. Yet in English, you have the distinction between policies and politics. And more, the debate is about politics and what people like to call political, as if political justifies all the nonsense you can throw it if you don't use numbers. And it's a policy relevance that should be the driver. And here I come up to the point that Bence mentioned, which is data. And I have always claimed that continuity in the data we have is a must. And it's much better to have a continuity on a limited number of data that come up with sexy ideas of changing the series all the time, because you cannot do any policy analysis. And the second thing is, everybody in the modern world comes up with an indicator that they want to throw in, and nobody thinks, where the heck are we going to find out these numbers? Bence remembers very well, although he wasn't in the unit he is right now, when the debate about turning FADN into the Farm Sustainability Data Network started, what I had asked is indicators that fit into one hand. How many did we discuss? 200 in the beginning? Okay. And it is extremely important to filter through the additional data, and we need additional data, to something that is meaningful at the policy level, but also possible to collect it. And here is where I mentioned before the wealth of information. We had a Draghi report and competitiveness, and the agri-food sector was out of it. Yet, agriculture in Europe is one of the first sectors that used remote sensing and satellite imaging to collect an enormous amount of data. What are we doing with it? Apart from control, we're sitting on it, and others are using it freely. It doesn't make sense in my view.
Again, very provocative. I saw you taking notes. Did you have a reaction to what Tassa said?
I was just agreeing with every word he was saying. No, just if things go well, you might be witness to how in DG Agri we use the availability of Copernicus data. So we have in the pipeline an analytical brief on crop diversity. Let's see if it makes the light of day. But indeed, we have an abundance of data. And regarding FSDN, it's true. We expanded the number of variables to collect to a large degree. Basically, the ambition was to cover as much as possible with respect to the environmental, social objectives, but also some of the missing economic variables. It was a tough discussion with member states, but I feel that we managed to come to a compromise. Basically, 25 member states supporting two abstaining from the vote on the implementing regulations. So I think it was a very good achievement, but acknowledging that there are challenges at each level of the data chain. So for farmers who volunteer to be part of the network, for the collectors, for the basically our liaison agencies, for us. So this is something that we don't take lightheartedly, and we will address issues. The only people who are the free riders in the FSDN and who are having a free lunch, which doesn't exist, are the researchers, because they will just be handed the data once it comes. So another provocative one from me.
Yeah, on the data, on your question, how we could make models fitter for the questions, I think the data is the crucial element. It's not so difficult to plug in equations, change them, and test them. It's always the data that takes the main amount of work to get something new in. When I remember when we introduced the food loss and waste, there is numbers, but there's always scarce, and there are inconsistencies between different sources. So we had to somehow mingle them together and come up with something which is probably not super reliable, but still the best you can do at the moment. And that influences, of course, also what you can do with that.
I find this question very like driving almost everything, is the amount of data that exists in the world and the need to have data to inform decision making. But between what decision makers need and the amount of data, the world is still trying to figure out how to synthesize that data so that it's decision ready. And that synthesis, I think, is part of this, like it's a negotiation in a way, right? Because the decisions you take on how to compile the data or put it into different buckets are decisions. It's not that the data manifests automatically. Tassos, do you want to come?
But maybe here is a point, one of my frustrations at the end of my career in the Commission, the lack of institutional memory. It really drives me mad. Especially when you see, my colleagues remember very well, very often I would go back and tell them to look at the Economic Research Service, which I hope will survive the current administration, because it is really exemplary in, you want to find data that go back in time, you find the data and go back in time in a manner that is helpful. And it's not that my former colleagues didn't do effort to actually have that, but you had these brilliant ideas that we need to go into a corporate structure, and you change the format of how all commission data should go around, even if there were DGs without any data, and DG Agri had data with a long tradition. And everything turned upside down, and you could not find what you had, what you needed, and you always had this tendency that every time there is a new commission coming in, words have to change. I mean, sustainable productivity is gone, sustainable competitiveness is in now. Okay, give me a break. Eh? What does it mean? And you always have this need to show that something is new, even when it was a continuation of something. And we have actually ended up not passing the knowledge of previous groups into a newer one, not to respect religiously this knowledge, but to understand what actually led us somewhere. I left how many? 3 cupboards full of all the notes I had from reforms that go back before I started the Commission, in the 80s. I don't know if the rats have eaten them or what, but what I know is there is no process in making and understanding what led to certain decisions in the past and why these decisions were relevant, had a certain impact, and why it's totally irrelevant today. And this is not a Commission issue. This is a global issue. And the way things are moving with artificial intelligence, where people are asking the most stupid questions and get the most stupid answers, I don't know what type of policy decisions we'll be making in a few years' time.
So I'm not going to go towards artificial intelligence, but I would like to open the floor for questions. We have 15 minutes, and then we'll take a coffee break. When you take the floor, could you introduce yourself? And also, if you have a question for a particular panelist, indicate who it's meant for. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Alexandru Marcheș, ISK Biosciences Europe. Two short questions. The first one is related to and thank you for the great presentation. There is a lot of data to take in. On the consumption patterns for agricultural products, I was surprised to see that there is, for developed countries, there is a kind of constant projection in terms of the split. And I wonder, the emerging sector of bioeconomy shouldn't bite a bit more from or be taken into account in increasing the share of other uses, non-food uses, or bite from the waste section. And then my second question is related to the assumptions on productivity. Could you elaborate a little bit more about the assumptions made for productivity growth in the European region? What were the background assumptions that were made? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Marcel, why don't we take a second question, and then we'll come up. And then after we do the panel, we'll go back to the back. Thank you.
Thank you. Alex Doring, European Feed Manufacturers, FIFAC. I'd like to pick up on the very interesting discussion on food waste and missing, or let's say, just quote again, Marcel, on the inconsistent data there. On the feed sector side, we have worked with all our chain partners to basically assist colleagues from GRC, Robert Barke on his team, who's working for many years on the food waste biomass flows, including food waste section, which always turns up as a residual because of the problems you mentioned. Now, when I listen to you, Marcel, and of course, Benz, it's a suggestion we made at the end of the day to colleagues in DG Agriculture. Isn't this the moment to bring up a true biomass balance sheet? Because at the end of the day, when you look at food waste, you can look at it two ways, right? It's as well a resource. Now, obviously, that's why I lost all my hair. We're at the borderline, food waste and co-products. I mean, we have to call a cat and a dog. And this is the issue because I think the challenge, and that comes back to the price scenarios, is there is just not enough biomass to go around to help us all, whether it's feed, food, biofuel, etc. Where we've moved away from scenarios 20 years ago is there will be, and we are seeing it now, increased competition for the biomass that's available. And whether it's the bioenergy targets, 12-fold increase of biogas production, how do you get there? Well, you need biomass, right? Even with a stable food production here in Europe. So our call is really, and I would like to hear from Marcel also on the OECD side, how can we fill the gaps, and by first of all improving the not just the methodology, but if you want to have better data, you need to have a clear categorization, clear terminology to avoid duplications, and to be sure when you look at the way biomass is produced, first of all availability, and on the consumption side, that you're tackling the challenges that you refer to. So why we are saying this, because we believe on our side, if you look at feed as the major input for livestock productions, and where are we going on the price side? So far, very stable. But if you factor in GHG emissions, we have the mitigation tools here and now. They're there, they're available. We don't see a market valuation, a market reward. So it's back to public policies to basically stimulate the uptake now of these mitigation technologies. But in terms of the forecast, in terms of the impacts of these technologies, it is for us vital to get a better grip on where we stand on biomass availability and its use. And it's really a recommendation for us. It's fascinating, no criticism intended, that your colleagues from DG Sante, they have now an obligatory accounting system for food waste, right? We don't see any connection to the work that you do at DG Agri or looking at DG Energy. Food waste is a huge amount in terms of the biomass availability. So we can only not just mention the institutional memory, but we really recommend to work with all the partners inside the Commission and maybe looking to OECD to get that control, better grip, understanding where we are going on biomass availability and then on the consumption side. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I'll come to the panel, and then I know there's one more question in the back. And so we've had questions kind of around bioeconomy, biomass modeling, and also a specific question about productivity assumptions in the EU. So I'll let Marcel have the first word, and then if either Tassos or Bence want to comment on that.
Yes, thanks for these questions. And indeed, these biomass flows are a critical point, and we tried to improve our system bit by bit by, for example, having the byproducts also as a feed input, like cereal brands or molasses or all these byproducts going back into feed. We have had a project last year with US colleagues at FAPRI who looked at the used cooking oil use in biodiesel production. And there we built a balance sheet for the used cooking oil and try to balance the world for that. And then see what would happen if all these countries would, with the target for sustainable fuel, would compete around that. It's not yet finished, so I don't have results for that. But yeah, we go in that direction there. But yeah, there's still many loose ends, right? You have so many processing paths which probably handle residuals differently. So it's a big task to collect this data and aggregate it to a national or global level. On the second question, on the productivity of the EU, I'll let Benson make the details on that. But I think in general, with all these restrictions on the availability of plant protection, compared to outlooks that we did 5 years ago, yield increases are much flatter than they used to be in our projections. So, for example, for wheat, I think we're completely flat in this edition. So there is more hindering elements to productivity in the EU than we have in other countries in our projections.
Thanks, Marcel. No, thank you for the question, Alexander. On the productivity side, indeed, in the projections that we produce, and then we pass it on to the OECD colleagues, and they put it into their own OECD FAO work. There, we are basing the yield projection on a number of assumptions. So basically, here we also have to balance out how we see the evolution of the past, of recent years, and then try to figure out how the technological change, how climate change implications, etc., might factor in to yield growth. So I think we are on the margin of conservative optimistic regarding the baseline yield assumptions. But I think what is equally important is that we look at what Marcel was also showing, the stochastic analysis, that we also include, thanks to the guys at JRC, in our Outlook publications. So we do have that part of the report which sheds light on alternative, I wouldn't say pathways, but options. Then just a very quick reaction to Alex. Alex is part of our distinguished group of market experts. I see some others in the room who we invite every year for the preliminary sort of overview of our baseline projections. So we ask experts to give their feedback, a bit, I think, mimicking what maybe the OECD does with the members. So it's very important to have that feedback from experts on the field. Are we on the right track, or are we completely off? I think it was you, Tassos, who started off this exercise Well, you were director in Agri, so it's something which is, it's no, it's super good. I think it's very relevant. And yeah, to answer to you, we are also building on improving the report that we publish with respect to the indicators that we provide. So biomass, we will look into it for sure, because we want to make sure that what we publish is relevant. So it's not just showing the market balance as such, but we try to figure out what are the key policy indicators that we can link up so that it serves also a policy purpose. And indeed, a cooperation with other DGs. You mentioned Santa, super important. If I remember from your slide, Marcel, you had fisheries in the model since 2011 or so. It's actually since last year that we are starting to establish closer contacts with DG Mare, because we want to include their expertise in terms of the evolution of EU fisheries and aquaculture, because it has an important role to play in terms of protein consumption in the EU. So we need to look at those trends, but also for the feed use in aquaculture coming from agricultural feed. So yes, this is something which we're also working on. Thanks for the comment.
Thank you. I see no indication that Tassos immediately wants the floor, but we'll come back. So there was one question in the back, so we'll take that last question. Please introduce yourself, and then we'll bring it up here. And if you have any 1-minute reflections to wrap the panel up on top of this question, that'd be great.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Gaston Funes. I am a counselor for agricultural affairs at the Embassy of Argentina. My question is for Marcel or for Benz or for two of them. Sorry, because I arrived a bit late at the very end of your presentation, so probably you have addressed my question already. But how do you take into account, if you do, or how does the model take into account different policies and proposals that are coming up very soon, such the EUDR, the EU deforestation regulation, or some other policies like pesticides or biotech policies that could and will have a huge impact in the agri-market and in the trade flows?
Thank you very much. So, Marcel.
Yes, indeed, that's a good question. And if the regulations are not yet signed off, we don't have them in the baseline. We might do some analysis around it if they are deemed relevant for the narrative in the publication. But yeah, the general rule, if it's not in the law, we don't take it in the outlook. And that was on the last question. Was also about the share of the different demand types. I must say that we are on the bioenergy side. We are very conservative with our projections. So we are way below the big goals that are all around the world, and that also supports again the low price story. But yeah, that's also interesting to analyze around that.
Great. So now I want to see if the panel wants to make any last remarks before we break for coffee. Tassos, any quick reflection?
Yes, especially now that I'm retired from this process, one of the most important things is to keep this process going. And if you want to keep this process going with all the pressures and the pretexts about costs and the rest, I think it's extremely important to understand the logic of what you just mentioned. If it's not in the law, let them do the baseline with what is there. There are plenty of research projects that should do baseline analysis, which I see scientists hesitating to do that. What, in my view, is extremely important is also what was mentioned by Benz early on. If we continue with this frontal attack on data availability with a pretext of cost, there's going to be a heavy price to be paid in the future. And that's why it's extremely important to keep this process going and find maybe sharper ways of communicating the results.
Yeah, I just must say that I really enjoyed this discussion, and I agree that it's really one of the important tasks to to make sure that from the science-based through the different level of hierarchies, the results need to come somehow to the policy and not to politics.
Yeah, I also thank you very much for the invitation. It was a real pleasure to be here. Thanks, Liane and Tassos, Marcel, and everybody from the audience. I just want to have one short comment. Liane, you were quick to brush it off the discussion, but the issue of AI, just to bring that back, this is going to be super important, not just for the sector as such and what it will bring as opportunities and maybe challenges in certain aspects, but also in the context of our modeling work, also filling in data gaps. There's a lot of very interesting work going on already on that, and we're really looking forward to see the use of AI, large language models, etc., for our analytical purposes. Thank you.
That's great. So I'm thinking about reframing the last session to be not what could go wrong, but what could go wrong and what can go well. And we can pick up AI as a possible thing to discuss at the end of the day. So I ask you to join me for a big round of applause for the panel. Thank you. Thank you very much. And now we have a 20-minute break, so we'll be back for the second panel at 11:05 in this room. Thank you very much.